Okay, so we did our presentation on encoding archival description, otherwise known as EAD, and we're presenting Jessica Costco, Kate Newman, and Peter Bagwell. The intended purpose of EAD. So EAD stands for Encoded Archival Description, and it's a non-proprietary de facto standard for the encoding of finding aids for use in networked or online environments. So finding aids are inventories, or they could be indexes or guides that are created by archival and manuscript repositories to provide information about specific collections, and they're organized in a certain way as well. While the finding aids may vary somewhat in style or organization, their common purpose is to provide detailed description of the content and intellectual organization of collections of archival materials. So pretty much that they are used for archival materials mostly. And EAD allows the standardization of collection information in finding aids within and across those repositories. And I have an example of EAD and what it could look like. And this is from the EAD website.
So, for the history of EAD, it started as a project at the University of California at Berkeley in 1993. And like Jessica explained, they wanted to make archives of finding aids available online. And they decided to create EAD with a standardized general markup language, which is just a standard markup language code used to type out the finding aids and convert them to an online platform. And they decided to use a document type definition template, which Google says sets out the format and tag structure of an XML or HTML document. And so they began working on this, and by 1995, they've gained the support of the Society of American Archivists, and the Library of Congress becomes the maintenance agency as well. And also in 1995, the creation of the tag library begins. And then in 1996, in February, they released the first trial of EAD called EAD BTD Alpha. And then the beta version of this is released in September. And they listen to people's comments and criticisms in order to make it better. And they work on it all the way up until 1998 when they released EAD 1.0. And also with this release, they decided to make EAD more XML compliant. And so XML is kind of under the umbrella of HTML. It's another markup language, but it's becoming more popular, and they decide to make EAD fit better within XML. And also within this new release, they update and revise the tag library as well. But there's also more revisions needed. So EAD 2002 comes out in 2002, and they make it more XML compatible and also change other deprecated elements within the tag library. And then in 2007, they make EAD even more XML compatible by releasing it in schema languages. So instead of using the document type definition as the template, they use an XML version of that, which they released it as Relax, NG, and WC3 schema languages. And then in 2010, there's a large call for an overall revision of EAD to last 5 years, which leads to the creation of EAD 3, which is what we use now. And they wanted to simplify EAD and update it so it can connect more easily to other standards. And within this update, there's a lot of revisions and removal and additions of the elements within the tag library. And there's also been smaller revisions of it in 2018 and with 2019 just to get rid of deprecated elements and to continue updating it as well. Next slide. So EAD is implemented in a few different ways. There is various programs called XML editors where you type in the XML code yourself, but it kind of has a lot of assistance with it, just double checking to make sure XML is correct. and other helpful elements to that. There's also software systems like ArchiveSpace, Archivist Toolkit, Argon, and Access to Memory, where it writes the XML for you and it helps you know what information you need to add into the finding aid to create it. However, ArchiveSpace has not been updated to EAD 3 yet. There's also an XSLT style sheet where you take your XML, as you can see in this image on the right, and you put it into the XSLT processor style sheet, and it converts it into like a PDF or HTML if you want to add the finding aid onto a website. And next slide.
All right, so big questions that users and maintainers may need to face in the future could be some of the questions that were also under the frequently asked questions under EAD. The first one, if we use EAD, do we still need to do MARC cataloging? And the answer on the website indicated that at this point in the development of EAD, MARC catalog records do constitute important navigational metadata that makes it both easier and more efficient to get to encoded finding aids from existing bibliographic and other systems. Then another question that was on there, how does EAD relate to efforts to build digital archives and libraries? So the development of large databases of EAD encoded finding aids documenting collections from numerous repositories and finding aids on network systems like the World Wide Web can be expected to gradually result in a mass of widely available descriptive data about archival materials. So with this context, the encoded finding aids will provide the viable infrastructure which digital copies of original historical materials or digital archival objects can be linked to the finding aids that describe them. And then another common question, where can archivists locate the most up-to-date information about EAD software tools, projects, and other new developments, which is very important for them to have that information. And the two suggestions were the encoded archival description official website, which most of our information has come from, since it's maintained by the Network Development and MARC Standards Office of the Library of Congress, so it's the official source. And another one would be the EAD help pages, which is maintained by the EAD Roundtable of the Society of American Archivists, which has a wide variety of information and other helpful links. So even though these questions were the frequently asked questions, these could also be used in the future to make sure that maintainers and users have that guidance as well. All right, significant changes required to keep up with the evolving information landscape. So these are the considerations that were taken during the revision from EAD 3 1.1.0 to EAD 3 1.1.1. So those are the newest addition. So some of these bulleted list are things that they kept in mind, which still are relevant as well for the future landscape of it. So to keep training of users and maintainers current, the necessary training will vary depending on their tasks and what the staff member will have to perform, but keeping that knowledge current definitely would help. To achieve greater conceptual and semantic consistency in the use of EAD, consistency would definitely be helpful in this as well because of people using it for varying ways, and especially staff members using it for different ways to perform. Explore mechanisms where EAD encoded information might operate more seamlessly and effectively, connect with, exchange, or incorporate data maintained according to other protocols. So making sure that EAD can perform all of these different tasks and do it seamlessly and consistently. To improve the functionality of EAD for representing descriptive information created in international and in multicultural environments. So making sure that it can still perform in different environments is very important. and to be mindful that a new version will affect current users. So since this has been revised many times, with each new version, it does affect current users and future users as well. So keeping that in mind as the information landscape continues to evolve.
So some weaknesses with EAD, with the earlier versions, a lot of complaints were workflows. If people were working on the EAD finding aids with different departments, staff training was very difficult. Sometimes institutions would not support archives in their creation of EAD finding aids, and it was also just very time consuming to write the XML. With later versions of EAD, a lot of people have commented that there are searchability issues with it, as well as challenges describing more digital materials. Next slide.
So as Kate was saying, within the development of encoded archival description, it ran into several different issues that have led to ongoing debates about it. The foremost being, when it was being developed, whether institutions could afford the cost it would take to implement EAD. So typically, institutions which failed to adopt the EAD standard often did so because they didn't have the funding, they didn't have the training, and they weren't familiarized with their staff for these kind of technical systems. Another question that came up about the viability of the EAD was the effectiveness of the finding aids. Specifically, if they were designed just for archivists, did they provide the kind of benefit to the public that might be trying to obtain access to the resources within the finding aid? There were also tensions between whether you're trying to describe the data retrospectively, that is, as it already exists, or whether or not you're trying to find a common standard way of describing the data so that they could create processes that enabled it to be shared widely. So this came down to also to, as technology changed and standards changed over time. So back in a 2001 survey, they found that archivists didn't have the time or the resources available to learn these kind of encoding routines into their daily routine. Like it just took up too much work time or too much technical skill. But more recent technology has changed so that the 2019 survey found that these kind of applications using programs such as ArchiveSpace made it so that you didn't have to do any kind of intensive coding. So it was already built into the application, making it much easier for staff to develop and use these kind of programs. Next slide. And so within the development of the EAD, from its very onset, all the institutions that were developing it looked to the General International Standard of archival description to develop these kind of programs within it. So there weren't too many kind of social, cultural, or political issues about the current use of the EAD, just because they were developed in tandem with already current international standards. And this is also why the EAD has become very commonplace internationally, because it's already developed within that kind of framework.
All right, and these are all of our sources combined that we used. So thank you for listening to our presentation.